Hi, I'm Sarah from the American Independence Museum. This month's story, or book, is about elections and voting. It is November after all, and I'm sure you're well aware that November is voting month. You've seen the ads on the TV, you've heard them on the radio, you've seen the signs all over the streets. You've heard your parents talking about it, you've heard it on the news. Everyone's talking about voting in the election. And that's because it's a huge deal. That's why we had the American Revolution, so that we, the people of the United States, could have the right to vote, to choose the people who lead our government, who represent us and speak for us. By voting, we get to have a voice in the government. We get to have a say in the laws that are made by electing people who we think best represent us and what we feel is the right thing to do. So join me as we learn a little bit more about elections and voting. And afterwards, try your hand at creating your own election in your home, or maybe even in your community or classroom. What's the Big Deal About Elections? By Ruby Shamir and Matt Faulkner. One person, one vote. Picture the scene. Bonfires lighting up the town square as parades of brass bands march by. Floats wheeling caged raccoons, bears, and eagles before rowdy crowds, torches exploding into shooting flames. What was all the excitement about? It was Election Day, the way Americans celebrated about 200 years ago. Kids loved to be part of the action and couldn't wait until they were finally old enough to vote. Life's very different these days, and the election day looks pretty different too. But one thing remains the same. Americans still vote on Election Day. And when you're 18, you'll be able to vote too. Why does that matter? What are Americans voting for, and why is voting so important? What's the big deal about elections anyway? In 1845, Election Day was set for the Tuesday after the first Monday of November. Why then? Many Americans were church-going farmers who lived far from the polls, so they couldn't go on Sunday, but needed a full day of travel and be back home for Wednesday's market day. And November was after the busy harvesting season, but before the wintry weather made travel too difficult. What are elections? Elections are a fair way to make decisions as a group. Say your class gets to choose what to play in gym, and 10 kids say kickball, but only 7 say tag. Well, kickball has won for the day. Every kid gets one vote, and the choice with the most votes wins. Now, can you imagine getting to choose your teacher, or your soccer coach, or your parents? Elections are cool because we vote to choose the people in charge. We elect our leaders to very big jobs, like presidents, governors, or mayors. That means those people get their power from us, the voters, who give those men and women those important positions. The U.S. Constitution starts with the words, "We the people," because we don't have a ruler who gets to be in charge forever. Instead, we decide together what's important and who's in charge. If they're not doing a good job, we get to choose a new leader in the next election. One very big deal about elections is that we, the people, each get one vote. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, strong or scrawny, tall or short, everyone has an equal say in the voting booth. Our government is elected to represent us. In a running race, the faster sprinter wins. In a spelling bee, the best speller wins. An election is a different kind of contest. The winner isn't necessarily the fastest or even the smartest, but the person who has the most voters trust to be in charge and help them. Who gets to vote? Most American citizens who are at least 18 years old can vote where they live, but it wasn't always this way. When the United States was first formed nearly 250 years ago, in most places only white men who owned a home or land were allowed to vote. No women, no African Americans, no Native Americans, no poor people, no one under the age of 21. None of them had a say when the time came to pick leaders and representatives in government. Slowly, over many, many years, different groups of people demanded the right to vote, and they won. Frederick Douglass knew that the right to vote in elections was an important part of the American freedom. He demanded the vote for Black Americans who were former slaves because it is our right. He said that without the vote, slavery is not abolished. Native Americans, the first people to live on this continent, were only granted American citizenship in 1924. And even then, it took another 40 years before every state allowed Native Americans to vote. And even though kids like you can't vote yet, your voice still counts. You can join with your friends and neighbors to stand up for what you believe in. When African Americans were denied the chance to participate in elections, children protested for the rights of their parents and grandparents. In doing so, they were marching for their very own futures too. You have to be an American citizen to vote in most elections in this country. Anyone born in America is automatically a citizen. If you weren't born here, you can become a citizen, though it takes some time and effort. We make change on Election Day with our votes, but we can make a difference every day with our actions. Nearly 50 years ago, 18-year-olds won the right to vote. Before that, voters had to be 21. Do you think kids younger than 18 should be allowed to vote? Kids who were brought to America very young, but without the proper forms to be citizens, are speaking up, declaring that they should be considered Americans because this is the only home they've ever known. They might not have the right to vote, but they have a voice and they demand to be heard. Why do we vote? We vote to elect people to lead the government. People who run for office are called candidates. Once a candidate wins an election, they're called an elected official, and they go to work in the government. But what exactly is government? For one thing, the government is a way to organize, plan, and build things that are too big for one person or family to do alone, especially things that we share, like roads. We all need roads to get to school, or to the store, or to the playground. But how do we decide where the road should go? Who will hire and pay the workers to pave the road? What about lighting the road so people can use it at night? Who will make sure that everyone drives safely on the road? Because we all share the roads, we all should have a say in answering those questions, and we do. Through the people we elect, we can get to decide what our government does, and to pay for big projects like roads. The government collects money, taxes from all of us. One very important goal of voting is to have a say in how our tax money is spent. This is one of the reasons the American Revolution started, to tell the King of England he couldn't tax Americans without representation, without giving them a say in the English elections. How do we elect our leaders? It's usually pretty simple. We vote for the person we support, and the candidate with the most votes wins. This is how we elect pretty much all of our leaders. But presidential elections are different because we elect presidents through something called the Electoral College. The Electoral College has nothing to do with the school you might go to after high school. Instead, it's a group of people from each state called electors. When we vote for a president, we're actually voting for electors in our states, who will then turn around and vote for the president. In most states, all of the electors of the state vote for the person who won the most votes in that state. The number of electors is the number of House of Representative members plus the number of senators, plus 3 from Washington, D.C. States with more people have more electors in the Electoral College. The Electoral College system can be pretty confusing. There have been 5 presidential elections in our history where a candidate for president won more votes but didn't become president. Those candidates didn't get enough Electoral College votes to win. How do we vote? Every year on Election Day, citizens go to their polling places to vote. Every state has different rules for how it's done. Some places have voting machines where you touch a computer screen to record your vote. In other states, you fill out a paper ballot that gets fed into a counting machine. These technologies are supposed to make voting quick, easy to count, and hard to cheat at. No new technology has been perfect, but we keep trying to come up with ways to make voting easier and more secure. Before you can vote, though, you need to sign up or register to vote. This is another way you can get involved, even if you're not old enough to vote yourself, by encouraging all the grown-ups you know to register to vote so they can be ready to cast their ballots on Election Day. Elections in the early America often were rowdy and noisy. Sometimes voters would gather at the local town hall and simply yell out their choice or stand by their man, the person who they wanted to win. Even though we still have one Election Day in November, a lot of states offer different ways to vote. People can vote by mail, and people can vote early. In some places, a full month leading up to Election Day. If you're far away from home on election day, you can send in an absentee ballot. People serving overseas in the military can vote from where they're stationed, and even astronauts can vote from space. What happens after elections? When candidates lose elections, they usually go home to their families and go on with their lives, though sometimes they choose to run for office again in the future. The winners, though, get to serve their term or terms in government. When the term is up or they lose an election, an elected official willingly leaves office and hands his or her position over to the next person elected to that role. This is called the peaceful transfer of power. And as strange as it sounds, it's really a big deal. Election losers and elected officials whose terms have ended don't start wars to take over the government, and they don't stay put and refuse to leave. They listen to the choice of the voters made and move on, leaving the office to the next guy or gal who has been chosen by the will of the people. The peaceful transfer of power shows that the real power isn't in the office or the elected official, but in us, the voters, and that's why it's important to vote on election day. And also to stay active all year long, paying attention to what our leaders do and say, because in the end, we are in charge. Former presidents have stayed busy after they left the office. Former President William H. Taft was appointed to serve on the Supreme Court. Former President John Q. Adams was elected to the House of Representatives. And former President George W. Bush became a painter. Elections are all about making sure the country is safe, prosperous, and fair well into the future. What do you think our government should spend its time on? What do you think our leaders should pay attention to?